I wanted to look at a couple articles because obviously this big debt ceiling thing has exploded in the news, and everybody's like, "Oh my God, the debt ceiling!
We have a
Republicans!"
question. We have a question real quick.
Oh, good.
Um, Ronora. Something I was thinking about is the possibility that if the government can only issue so many bonds due to no raise in debt ceiling, but the demand is unchanged, would that drive down the rates on bonds? Yes, absolutely. That's what happens when during these periods where the debt ceiling debate, whenever this bullshit starts, and it appears as though the government might run out of the ability to create treasuries, then that's what happens because they don't stop spending their money. They have made their budget decisions. They are creating money on the regular to fund their expenditures. And so what they're doing here is when they are not allowed to issue new treasury securities, they still continue spending money into the system, but they're not soaking that money up through treasury issues. So what happens then is that money goes chasing for existing treasury securities, and that has the effect of driving the bond rates down. And I think that's also what we observe oftentimes during this kind of theater, is that and the banks start having excess reserves, by the way, which curtails their ability to make new loans. So that's another side effect of all of this debt ceiling and temporary stop of issuing new treasury securities. Basically, the banks' excess reserves swell up, which, due to their leverage ratio calculations, makes it harder for them to make new loans. And a lot of these excess reserves go chasing treasury securities, driving down the interests on treasury securities.
And she adds, also have to consider SLR regulations. I don't know what those are.
Yeah, that's a supplementary leverage ratio. That's exactly, I think, what I was just talking about, which is when the excess reserves swell up on the bank's accounts, these reserves are counted as loans, as if they're the same as loans, even though they're absolutely safe and secure. They're never going to default on those, so they should not be counted as those. And actually, during the lockdowns, during the 2020s, 2021s, for a period, they did ease up on those SLR regulations, but they're now, from what I understand, they're now back in full force. So stupid regulations are back in full force now. So as long as this kind of stuff goes on, and some banks might run into problems if they hit their leverage ratio maximums or minimums or however it's calculated, they might run into trouble making plain routine loans that they would have otherwise made.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to try sharing my screen here again just to see if it works. I've had problems sharing my screen in the past, and maybe it's going to work this time. Let's see. Nope. It just froze the screen up. All right. I'll unshare this. So I wanted to look at a couple articles that I found, not because they're necessarily interesting, but the noise that gets created. I wanted to show examples of these arguments going back and forth, and this craziness going back and forth about issues that just don't fucking exist. So I've got this article pulled up from this is the War Room from Steve Bannon. And I guess he had this guy named David Brat, who's the that's a funny last name, David Brat, and he's the dean at the Liberty University School of Business. And the title of the article here is Dave Brat on the United States debt ceiling. Everybody knows we're gonna default. Ah! Right. First of all, the only reason for default, as we just pointed out, it would be a political decision. It has nothing to do with, oh, we ran out of money, or, oh my God, the finances don't work out, or we didn't tax enough. It's just all entirely nonsense. And if you scroll down a little bit, Nemo, he then I mean, not gonna watch the video. Scroll back up so I can read the text there a little bit. Yeah, they're good. So just to, there's a little blurb here about what's in the video. Is it says, Dave Brat, former congressman and professor of business and economics, talks to host Steve Bannon about the financial crisis Big term there. Financial crisis caused by out-of-control federal spending. More emotionally loaded words. And he quotes David Brat saying, "The left is supposed to have feelings and care about children. Every kid is $125,000 in debt when they're born. Every worker is $250,000 in debt right now. And they're talking about a financial crisis? Hell, folks, we are there. Okay, you see this? Left and, hey, left, let's fight about this. Nobody's in debt.
Well,
there's nobody in debt."
Right. So every worker has $250,000 in savings right now.
Yeah, it's the opposite.
It's the opposite, right? It's not that they owe. It's that this money is sitting on bank accounts in the country. And yes, the U.S. there's a lot of income discrepancies in the U.S. So a lot of this money obviously is sitting in rich people's bank accounts. But if you want to play this game of divvying it up throughout the entire population, then it's the private sector's net savings that constitutes the total debt. It's not their debt.
Right. So this is a perfect example of fist fighty, annoying bullshit that simply is not an issue, that doesn't exist, that we could stop fighting about. Let me move on to another article. This is from Russia Today, RT.com, that U.S. warned of default. The Treasury Secretary says a debt limit hike is badly needed. Now, this one's interesting because this is all technically true. The U.S. is expected to reach a statutory debt ceiling next week, which could see the country defaulting on its obligations unless preventative steps are taken. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen warned on Friday in a letter to House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. This is in quotes from the letter, once the limit is reached, Treasury will need to start taking certain extraordinary measures to prevent the United States from defaulting on its obligations, Yellen wrote. She noted, however, that these measures will only go as far as to give Congress time to negotiate and pass a debt limit hike, most likely until early June. So here's what's insidious about this article is that it's technically true, right? Is that the Federal Reserve, because it's completely beholden to Congress and the laws of Congress, can only act within the sphere that Congress allows it to. And if Congress arbitrarily says there's a debt ceiling, then the Federal Reserve, the Treasury Secretary has got a problem on her hands, right? Because she's got to work within the realm that's given to her. And then we hear this, Treasury will need to start taking certain extraordinary measures to prevent the United States from defaulting on its own obligations. Well, it's not a default, right? It's just, is it default if I have the money and I just decide not to make my payment? Is that default?
Yeah. Yeah, so that would be the only possible way to default, was to choose to not pay the money, not for any reasons of ability to pay or whatever, but they would just choose to stop paying.
Right.
That's the only way the U.S. could ever default on its debt, quote unquote.
Right. So here's another perfect example of a bullshit problem that's not real. The government makes it real because they act like it's real, and they have these big arguments and jump up and down, and the Republicans are in charge, and we're going to debt ceiling, the Biden, we're not going to let the Republicans ruin the. It's all horseshit. They can just stop arguing about this. I've got another one from Zero Hedge here. Debt ceiling battle to test GOP resolve under McCarthy. This week, the United States Treasury activated so-called extraordinary measures after the U.S. hit the debt ceiling. This is referring to similar stuff that the previous articles were talking about. He talks about Tyler Durden here talks about Janet Yellen saying a similar thing to what we just read, and then he goes on to say, now newly minted House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who's a Republican from California, who made a boatload of concessions to GOP holdouts in exchange for the votes, has been pressing Democrats to come to the bargaining table. Democrats, meanwhile, have been giving McCarthy the cold shoulder and have characterized several ideas from the Republicans as non-starters, the Hill reports. Republicans are creating a crisis that need not exist. I agree with Representative Brendan Boyle, Democrat from Pennsylvania, on this. Top Democrat of the House Budget Committee is accusing the GOP of playing political games. The impasse has heightened public concern in recent days, particularly as a Treasury Department has begun what it calls, in quotes, extraordinary measures to keep the U.S. government from defaulting on its debt. The standoff comes as House Republicans have ramped up calls to tie spending cuts to any bill raising or suspending the debt limit. So I completely agree with this Democrat saying the Republicans are creating a crisis that need not exist. Now, not that the Democrats don't do it as well when they're the minority in power, right? But
Right.
this whole debt ceiling thing, it's just political theater that one side can use to leverage the other side. And, I don't know how many of these members actually understand any of this stuff or not. But I think they do understand, at the very least, that the debt ceiling can always be used as a public awareness tool where they could rile up the public about the debt ceiling in order to try to bring something to the negotiating table.
Well, Ronora just pointed out here, they are basically by silent omission admitting it's a matter of process and not economics.
Boom. Nice, Rowanora. Good synopsis there.
I mean, the whole thing just makes more sense if you understand that what I've come to believe at this point is that the whole government just exists to create drama and fighting, to create topics for people to get excited about and argue over nothing, basically, for an extended period of time. It's basically just sliding from one crisis into another, right?
Right. Well, and then we got Ron Paul coming up next year. Are you ready to make fun of Ron Paul, Nima?
Yeah.
So we got Ron Paul here on InfoWars, writing an article. I don't know for InfoWars, if InfoWars is just posting it from wherever he writes. So this is written by Ron Paul. This week, the U.S. government reached its $31.4 trillion borrowing limit. Oh, the borrowing limit. We already know that's fake. Issue, better known as the debt ceiling. This led to a showdown among House Republicans, President Biden, and the congressional Democrats. House Republicans are demanding that President Biden and Senate Democrats agree to include spending cuts with the debt ceiling increases. However, President Biden and the congressional Democrats are refusing to negotiate with Republicans. Rather, that they and their allies in the mainstream media are lambasting Republicans for their irresponsibility in seeking to include spending cuts with an increase in the debt ceiling. Ron Paul goes on to say, America's national debt is approximately 122% of the gross domestic product, meaning the government owes more than the population can produce, Nima. Interest payments on the national debt follow in size behind other federal budget big spending areas of Social Security, Medicare, and defense. How are we going to pay for all this interest, Nima? How are we going to do it?
Yeah, we wouldn't have to. I mean, we could just issue zero interest bonds if that's the problem. But they never discuss that, So.
Well, and here's another fake issue, right? We're spending a certain percentage of the gross domestic product. Oh my God, who cares? Japan's been at like 250% for freaking decades, and they still can't get their economy kickstarted. And the reason is they're working with bullshit ideas.
Right. There was a book that came out a couple of years ago at this point where they've concluded that once you hit the 90% debt to GDP, then you're just on your
way out.
Yeah, it's like no turning back from that. But there have been MMT economists who have analyzed that book and analyzed the premises, and they found out that they were completely commingling foreign indebtedness with
Local,
with
national,
indebtedness in a local currency, because in those latter cases, it's absolutely not the case that it has to lead to a sovereign default, as you just mentioned. Japan has something like 300% of GDP in national debt at this point, and it hasn't led to any kind of national default or whatever.
Right. So, I mean, this is just another perfect example of let's argue about something that doesn't fucking matter. Roa Nora has written some more here. But what if the Dems, due to political pressure from inflation, and whatnot, go along with it? More of a chance for this to happen than any other point in my lifetime, I think. Yeah, I mean, to this point, and she, I presume just due to political machinations. That's exactly the point. This is entirely a political process. This is like nothing to do with finance, nothing to do with economics. This is pure political decisions. And and what we're saying is that they're basing these political decisions and political arguments on issues that are fake and don't exist.
Well, it goes back to what I said last time. It's always they create these figures and these numbers that they expect everyone to care about, or they tell you here's the new number that you have to care about now. And it's never really explained why or what's behind and what's the reasons for that. It's the same that they do with the global temperature. They declare, this is the global temperature that we are allowed, or this is the global temperature increase that's allowed. Anything beyond that is disaster. Anything below that is good. We've achieved something good. Here's the 7 or 8 incidents of positive COVID PCR tests that we have to achieve this week or whatever. And if we achieve that, we're good. If not, we're bad. And it goes on and on. They create all these stupid ass metrics and numbers, and people just assume that they mean something. And it's really not. They don't mean what we think they mean, or what we're told they mean. They are just tools to achieve ulterior objectives that we're not even really aware of what's going on here. Population control, ordering the population around, achieving financial objectives, achieving whatever political objectives, but they have nothing to do with the metrics and numbers that they present to us.
I have a silly analogy that I think might help the understanding of this situation. When I was in high school, actually, when I was in middle school, I started taking Japanese classes. And when I got to high school, freshman year, I was able to take second year Japanese, even though I was a freshman. And they had a new Japanese teacher this year, and so the sophomores and older students had a different Japanese teacher the previous year at the high school. And apparently, this Japanese teacher had no ability whatsoever to control the students, and the students had convinced this teacher. So this is back when we still had overhead projectors, right? Did you have those in Germany, Nima? Overhead projectors when you were going to school? Okay, yeah. So we had the overhead projector. So every day, the students would get in there early, and then the teacher would come in, and there'd be one student that sat by the outlet next to the wall and unplugged the overhead projector, and the teacher didn't see it. And they had convinced the teacher that in order to get the overhead projector to work, because obviously she's hitting the button, it's not coming on, that she had to walk around it 3 times and blow into the fan to kickstart it. And when she did that, they'd plug in the projector and she'd hit the button and it'd work, right? So here's the question. In order to turn on that projector, do you have to walk around it 3 times and blow into the fan to kickstart it? Well, obviously no, but in this case, yes. Because the students made this fake shit up and controlled the situation that made it real, right?
Well, and it's even worse. So with the kinds of scams that the globalist governments run on their people, there's not even a beneficial effect to the things. They ask people to wear masks. They ask people to get experimental risky gene drug injections. They ask people to do all kinds of shit that supposedly does something.
You need carbon taxes to change the weather. Yes. So
the weather changes. You need to have the interest rates need to go up so we stop inflation, but then the inflation doesn't stop. You never see any of the things that they claim that their measures do. You never actually see any of those materialize. And at that point, it doesn't even matter anymore to them. It's like, oh, well, we've done it now and we're going to continue doing it. We don't need any evidence for it because the theory is all there is, and it's never questioned. It's operating procedure. They hate us. Yeah, they do.
Yep, I think that's an accurate statement. Yes.
They absolutely have nothing but contempt for the common man, for the population.
And then to that point, they hate us so much, and one of the greatest ways that they get us not to be able to organize is get us to fight each other over fucking nothing.
Exactly.
That's the conversation we're trying to have here, is that, okay, I mean, not that there wouldn't be stuff for the left and right to fight over if we got this economics issue figured out, but this isn't something that we need to fight over. This is all fake stuff. And on that point, I want to do one more article before I stop criticizing these articles. So this is from Zero Hedge. Blank check. Democrats want to totally eliminate the debt ceiling with a new bill. So, again, this is from Tyler Durden. I wonder who this guy actually is at Zero Hedge.
Brad Pitt, of course.
So a group of 43 Democrats want to completely eliminate the debt ceiling. Oh, my God. Which they say Republicans have weaponized, which would give the government a blank check to borrow without any limit from Congress. Again, I agree with the Democrats here. The Republicans are weaponizing it. And, again, no other country on earth has a fucking debt ceiling.
It's not true that there would be no limits from Congress, because Congress makes the bills that allow the government to spend to begin with.
Right.
So that is supposed to be the checks and balances from Congress upon the Treasury, upon the government, not the debt ceiling. Coincidentally, debt ceiling never ends up being any kind of check and balance because they just raise it. So the checks and balances are supposed to happen during the budget negotiations. That's when it matters, not when the decisions have already been made.
Yeah, and then to your point, they just lift the debt ceiling whenever they feel like it, so there actually isn't a debt ceiling, so that's more proof that this is arguing about nothing. Right? So yes. the end the threat of default act introduced by Representative Bill Foster, a Democrat from Illinois and co-sponsored by 42 House Democrats, comes after the federal government hit 31,000 trillion. I don't think this guy could do math. 31 or he's using a comma instead of a decimal. 31 trillion debt ceiling last week. According to the Democrats, instead of attempting to responsibly spend taxpayer dollars through negotiations, it's time to just eliminate all limits on federal borrowing. Again, here, I mean, just another thing. Okay, in some sense, yes, it's taxpayer dollars because we pay taxes and the government spends it into existence, and therefore it's our dollars. But what he's getting at here is that there's a limit to the amount of taxes that can be brought in, therefore there's a limit to spending, which we've already talked about, isn't a thing. That's not a thing. This is another fake thing to fight about. I mean, this goes on, and I mean, I can further criticize it, but that's just, I mean, I don't, that's enough of that. It's just another example of, the whole news sphere gets inflated with this shit that's fake to get us fighting over issues that don't exist. So please, let's learn some MMT. And let me say this too. Like, okay, maybe MMT isn't 100% accurate. And, the more that we look at people like, Colin Roche or Professor Richard Werner, where there's these different economic areas that these different people are approaching the system from, and they're not necessarily MMT people, but they're recognizing that the money gets created from nowhere. They're recognizing that the money gets created from nowhere, and then that has implications different from the neoclassical understanding, which is, we got to tax it in order to spend it because of the barter theory of money. Blah. Right?
Yeah, I think it's a good basis of understanding. Doesn't mean it's perfect. No theory is perfect, but I think it's definitely much better than a lot of the common theories that are circulating these days.